The Afghan sun beat down on the jagged ridge like a merciless hammer. Dust choked the air as explosions echoed between the mountains. A platoon of Navy SEALs huddled behind fractured boulders, every breath filled with grit and gunpowder. Sweat, mixed with blood, streaked across their faces. Their position had been compromised hours earlier, and now they were pinned under relentless fire. The enemy had them bracketed, machine guns pounding from high ground that no amount of grit could overcome. Every second stretched thinner than the last. Chief Petty Officer Daniels pressed his back against the rock, trying to block out the hiss of incoming rounds. He glanced down the line. 4 of his men were wounded, too badly. Their medic worked with shaking hands, his supplies running out. They needed cover, extraction, something. Instead, all they had was the cruel reality of high ground stacked against them. Daniels grabbed his radio, desperation carving into his usually steady voice. "Overlord, this is Viper 1. We're cut off, repeat, cut off. Need immediate close air support." Static answered. Then a clipped voice replied, "Copy, Viper 1. Fast movers unavailable. Stand by, stand by." The word felt like a death sentence. The SEALs knew how the dance usually went. In mountains this steep, jets stayed high. Drones were too slow to break a siege like this. Helicopters? Not a chance. They'd be shredded before they touched down. Doctrine said their situation was nearly hopeless. Doctrine didn't account for the way bullets chewed stone inches from their skulls. "Damn it," muttered Alvarez, crouched beside Daniels. "We're not making it out unless someone pulls a miracle." No one argued. Men like these didn't waste words when the truth was obvious. Another burst of gunfire ripped overhead. The air stank of cordite and heat. Daniel's mind raced. He had seen plenty of bad firefights, but this felt different. This felt like a wall with no cracks. Then the radio sparked again. Hog 2, inbound from the north. Calcine Viper, confirm coordinates. The voice was different. Calm, almost serene, in contrast to the chaos around them. But what made? The men's pause wasn't the composure, it was the unmistakable tone. A woman's voice. Daniels blinked, disbelief, cutting through exhaustion. "Say again?" "Hog 2, inbound. A-10 Thunderbolt, ready to assist. Mark targets." The SEALs exchanged glances. A-10s weren't unheard of, but the terrain was brutal, and no pilot with sense would risk flying low enough to make a difference here. Their ridgeline was a death trap. Jagged cliffs on both sides, crossfire waiting to shred anything foolish enough to dive into it. "Did she just say 10? Alvarez asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yeah," Daniels muttered. "She did." The medic, still working on a wounded teammate, snorted bitterly. "Hope she plans on shooting from space, because nobody's getting in here alive." But the radio crackled again, her voice unwavering. "Viper, I see your smoke. You're taking fire from the East Ridge. Stand by for run-in." Daniels felt his jaw tighten. She couldn't possibly mean it. No pilot would drop that low. Not here. Not under this much fire. "Ma'am," Daniels said into the mic, "that's a hot zone. You'll never make it below the ridgeline without getting chewed." A pause, then a calm reply. "Watch me." Silence fell among the team for a moment. They had all heard confidence before. They had all heard bravado. But there was something in her tone that wasn't arrogance. It was certainty. Minutes later, the low rumble of engines reached their ears. Not the scream of an F-16 overhead, but the guttural growl of twin turbofans. The sound was deeper, closer, unmistakable. The A-10 Warthog. Daniels craned his neck skyward. Between smoke and dust, a shadow emerged against the blinding sun. Broad, wings, stubby frame, and a cannon so massive it jutted like a spear from the nose. The sight alone drew a flicker of hope from exhausted men. But that hope was tempered by doubt. "She won't come down here," Alvarez muttered. "No one's crazy enough." The engines grew louder. The ground began to vibrate beneath them. Then, impossibly, the A-10 dipped lower. It was no longer a distant silhouette. It was descending into the throat of the valley, banking between cliffs like a bird skimming treetops. The Taliban opened fire instantly, tracer rounds arching skyward. The Warthog didn't flinch. "Holy hell," whispered one SEAL, eyes wide. Through the cockpit glass, they caught a fleeting glimpse of the pilot's helmet. Cool, focused, steady hands, pulling a machine most considered unwieldy into terrain that could swallow it whole. And then the GAU-8 Avenger roared. The cannon's growl wasn't a sound, it was a force. The entire valley shook as streams of depleted uranium shells tore into the ridgeline. Dirt erupted like geysers. Enemy positions vanished in plumes of smoke and fire. The SEALs flattened against the ground as the strike thundered overhead. When it ended, silence fell for the first time in hours. Smoke curled into the sky. Enemy fire stuttered, broken. The men blinked in disbelief. Daniels grinned for the first time all day. "Well, I'll be damned." But before they could catch their breath, the engines roared again. She was circling back, already preparing for another pass. The SEALs had seen courage before. They had lived shoulder to shoulder with it. But this was something else entirely. This was madness married to precision, risk fused with mastery. A pilot who had promised the impossible and then delivered. Not with bravado, but with discipline so calm it bordered on terrifying. Daniels lifted his radio again, heart pounding. "Hog 2, that was one hell of a run." Her reply came back cool, unshaken. "Copy, Viper. I'm not finished." The SEALs looked at each other. Their odds had shifted in the space of 30 seconds. They weren't out yet, but now, for the first time all day, they believed they could be. The woman in the sky had changed the equation. And as she dove again, threading her Warthog into terrain every pilot before her had avoided, the SEALs realized something that would stay with them forever. Impossible had just been redefined. Major Claire Donovan had always believed in edges. Not the smooth, comfortable plateaus where most people lived, but the sharp, perilous boundaries where failure and triumph blurred together. Growing up in the Midwest, she had spent summers watching. Crop dusters skim cornfields, so low their wings seemed to scrape the stalks. While other children clutched their ears at the roar of engines, Claire studied their paths with fascination. Precision in chaos, risk married to skill that was her first education in flight. Her second education came years later at the Air Force Academy, where skepticism followed her like a shadow. Female cadets weren't rare, but female cadets who declared early they wanted to fly attack aircraft were viewed differently. Fighters had glamour, bombers had weight. But the A-10 Warthog was a beast apart, built not for speed or elegance, but for endurance, for brutality, for surviving the impossible. The very mention of it made some cadets scoff. To them, flying the Warthog wasn't a dream, it was a career sentence. Claire didn't see it that way. From the moment she climbed into the cockpit during training, she understood what the Warthog truly was, a promise. Unlike sleek jets that dazzled in air shows, but stayed high above the fight, the A-10 was a soldier's aircraft. Slow, armored, ugly by every conventional measure, but designed to do one thing better than anything else: fly low, soak punishment, and bring fury down exactly where troops needed it. In those early days, instructors tested her constantly. Some subtle, some blatant. They wanted to know if the girl with steady hands was tough enough, precise enough, ruthless enough to command the beast. She made mistakes, burned too hot at first, but she never flinched when corrected. Instead, She absorbed every lesson, every critique, and sharpened her instincts until even skeptical instructors admitted quietly that she had the makings of someone exceptional. Yet whispers followed her into squadrons. Some peers believed she pushed too hard. They called her reckless, said she cut her approaches too close, that she ignored the invisible lines other pilots respected. Claire never argued. Arguments were wasted breath. She preferred results. Each sortie proved her judgment. Each precision strike silenced doubters. And when commanders saw her after-action reports, where risks translated into missions, completed without friendly casualties, they stopped questioning. Still, old doubts lingered in corners of hangars and ready rooms. She's good, some said. But one day she'll push too far. On the day the SEALs called for air support, those doubts echoed faintly in her mind, but they never controlled her. What controlled her was the clarity she had honed through years of practice. Trust the aircraft, trust her instincts, and above all, trust the mission. When the call came, she was already airborne, patrolling a sector far from the firefight. The first transmission reached her through clipped static. SEAL team in contact, heavy fire. Pinned on a ridge. Jets unavailable. They needed air support immediately. She acknowledged, voice calm. Hog 2, copy. Mark your smoke. As she banked toward their coordinates, she ran through her mental checklist. Altitude options limited. Terrain steep. Enemy dug in. Doctrine said she should keep distance. Lob fire from safe height. Doctrine also said those men on the ridge would likely die before help arrived. That was the edge. She thought of every time an instructor had told her to hold higher, to respect the book. Then she thought of the medic down there, hands shaking. Over wounded men, and the commander staring at impossible angles. She pictured the dirt spraying inches from helmets, the trapped silence between gunshots. She pushed the throttle forward. The Warthog responded with its guttural growl, engines thundering as she descended. The cockpit shuddered in turbulence, dust curling around her canopy. Warning lights blinked faintly, complaining about her angle, her speed. She ignored them. Machines were meant to protest. Pilots were meant to decide. Her wingman's voice crackled through combs. 2. Terrain's hot. You sure about this? Stay high, she replied evenly. I'm going in? The truth was, she had been preparing for this her whole career without knowing it. Every low pass she had practiced, every tight valley she had threaded, every sneer she had endured about pushing limits, it all built to this decision. Below, the SEALs doubted. She could hear it in their clipped responses, their unspoken disbelief. They didn't think she could get low enough to matter. No pilot had, not here. But Claire had never lived comfortably with the word can't. She adjusted her visor, steadied her breath, and dipped lower still. The valley opened before her like a stone throat, daring her to enter. Enemy tracers streaked skyward, white-hot fingers clawing for her wings. The Warthog's armor groaned but held. Claire's hands remained still, precise, guiding the beast into the very maw of fire. And in that moment, she felt not fear, but clarity. Everything the doubts, the whispers, the pressure of command, all burned away in the roar of engines. She was exactly where she belonged, flying the edge where survival and destruction met. Her thumb rushed the trigger. The GAU-8 Avenger thundered. The valley was a cage of rock and fire. For hours the SEALs had lived inside it, pinned beneath the enemy's withering gunfire. The mountains echoed like drums, every crack of a rifle magnified, every explosion bouncing between cliffs until it felt like the whole sky was collapsing. They had learned to duck at the smallest sound, to press themselves into the dirt as bullets sliced air just inches above. But now, something new filled the valley, the guttural rumble of twin turbofans. At first, they didn't trust their ears. Sound often deceived in combat distant rotors, phantom jets, illusions born of exhaustion. Yet this was different. This was heavy, steady, relentless. The sound of a machine that did not skim the edge of war, but carved straight into its heart. The seals craned their necks upward. Through a haze of dust and smoke, they saw it a silhouette. Against the sun, stubby wings spread wide, a nose like a blunt hammer, a cannon jutting forward like the tusk of some prehistoric beast. The warthog. Jesus, Alvarez whispered. She actually came. Daniels, crouched behind the rock, squinted. The aircraft didn't just appear overhead and linger high. It descended, slowly at first, then with absolute commitment. No way, muttered Collins, the team sniper. She's not bringing that hog down here, not in this terrain. But she was. The A-10 tilted, wings banking as it threaded the ridgeline. Each second carried it lower, closer, deeper into the valley, where doctrine said no pilot had business flying. The cliffs loomed on either side, jagged teeth ready to bite metal. The insurgents saw it too. Tracers erupted from the eastern ridge, long white streaks clawing upward, trying to swat her from the sky. The seals ducked as the valley lit up. Pull out, Collins shouted, though his words were useless against engines that already drowned human voices. Yet the warthog did not pull out. Inside the cockpit, Major Claire Donovan's grip was steady. Her visor reflected green light from the targeting screen, but her focus remained outside. She saw the tracers, calculated their arcs. She felt the turbulence ripple through the frame. Every second demanded precision, every adjustment the difference between threading the valley and slamming into rock. She pressed lower. The SEAL's disbelief shifted into stunned silence. No one had ever seen anything like it. And then, the cannon spoke. The GAU-8 Avenger was not a weapon. It was an event. The sound tore the valley apart, a growl deeper than thunder, louder than any storm. The ground vibrated beneath their boots. Smoke belched from the warthog's nose as streams of depleted uranium rounds ripped across the ridgeline. Each shell struck like a hammer, shattering boulders, obliterating bunkers, throwing men and debris into the air. The SEALs pressed flat, eyes wide, as the earth itself seemed to roar. Holy, Alvarez began, but the rest of his words were swallowed by the cannon's fury. Up on the ridge, the enemy scattered in panic. Fighters who had moments ago rained bullets with confidence now broke from cover, sprinting for their lives. Their weapons clattered to the dirt. Some fired blindly upward, desperate to wound the beast above them. But the warthog didn't flinch. It cut through the valley like a blade, each burst of fire exact and merciless. Claire adjusted her line, rolling slightly to rake another trench. Her voice crackled through the SEAL's radios, calm as ever. Target ridge suppressed, moving for another pass. Daniels blinked. Another pass? She had just defied everything they thought possible. Surely she wouldn't, but she was already. Climbing, looping around, preparing to dive again. The SEAL's fear shifted into awe. For hours they had fought alone, trapped by an enemy who believed terrain and firepower guaranteed victory. Now, in the space of 30 seconds, everything had changed. One pilot had cracked the cage. Collins let out a low whistle, shaking his head. I've seen some flying in my time, he muttered. But that's something else. The medic, still kneeling beside a wounded teammate, gave a grim smile. She just bought us time. Daniels keyed his radio, voice firm now, hope rekindled. Hog 2, beautiful work. We're marking new targets, standing by. Copy, came the reply, still calm, still steady. The SEALs watched the warthog vanish briefly behind the ridgeline, only to reappear seconds later, engines roaring, nose dipping for another strike. Enemy tracers lit up the sky once more, but fewer now, scattered, panicked. And as the warthog, dove, every man on that ridge understood something profound. They were no longer fighting for survival alone. They were fighting with a guardian above them, a pilot willing to risk everything, flying lower than anyone had ever dared. The impossible was happening, and it was only the beginning. The first pass had shattered the ridge, but war rarely ended with one strike. Smoke curled upward, mixing with dust, coating the valley in a bitter haze. The SEALs crouched low, ears still ringing from the thunder of the GAU-8. Their hearts pounded against ribs that had learned too well what fear felt like. Yet now, for the first time in hours, fear had a rival hope. Chief Daniels wiped grime from his face, forcing his breathing to slow. Around him, the team regrouped. The wounded were checked again, rifles reloaded, grenades counted. They weren't out yet, but they weren't done either. Above, the warthog circled, its engines growling like a predator, choosing when to strike again. Daniels keyed his radio. Hog 2, effects on target were perfect. Requesting secondary strike on Ridge 3-5. Heavy concentration of fire. Claire's voice came back without hesitation. Copy, Ridge 3-5, stand by, rolling. In. The calm in her tone amazed them. She didn't sound like someone threatening death. She sounded like someone reading a grocery list, yet they had already seen what that calm delivered. The sound grew again, a low rumble swelling into a roar. The A-10 reappeared above the ridge, but this time she flew even lower. Holy hell, Alvarez muttered, craning his neck. She's practically skimming the trees. The warthog dove into the valley like it belonged there, wings nearly brushing the jagged stone. To the SEALs, it looked suicidal. 2. Claire, it was geometry angles, speed, altitude all carefully measured, each risk weighed against the men below. Enemy fire erupted. Tracers stitched the sky, arching too slow to catch her. Mortar rounds thumped from the ridge, bursting uselessly. Behind her path, the Taliban fighters had prepared for helicopters, maybe drones, not for a beast like this to come howling directly into their throats. Claire lined up the ridge through her HDU. Fingers steady, breath controlled, she thumbed the trigger. The GAU-8 thundered again. Shells raked the enemy line, carving earth into trenches, turning bunkers into fireballs. The roar drowned even the insurgents' screams. Entire firing positions vanished under the storm. From the ground, the SEALs felt the shockwaves ripple through their chests. Dust cascaded off the rocks that shielded them. They couldn't help it, they cheered. Hardened operators, men who rarely showed more than a grim nod, shouted like fans in a stadium. Get some, Alvarez bellowed, pumping a fist. Daniels grinned despite himself. That's our angel up there. The ridge erupted in chaos. Taliban fighters scrambled, abandoning positions, desperate to escape the wrath above. Some fired. In blind defiance, their rounds whistling into empty sky. Others dropped rifles entirely, fleeing into gullies that offered little protection. Claire pulled the warthog up, banking hard, dust trailing her wings. The strain tugged at her frame, but the A-10 was built for abuse. Viper, Ridge 3-5 neutralized, she reported. Mark next. The commander in Daniels felt the shift momentum was theirs. He grabbed smoke and hurled it into the air, marking a bunker further north. As the smoke rose, Claire swung wide, setting up another run. Her third dive was bolder still. This time she threaded between two cliffs, so close the SEALs swore her. Wingtips scraped stone. The insurgents tried to rally, shouting, firing RPGs into the sky. One rocket screamed past her canopy, so close it painted the glass with a streak of smoke. Claire didn't flinch. She adjusted, dipped lower, and unleashed another torrent of cannon fire. The ridge cracked apart under the assault. The bunker marked by smoke disintegrated, flames spewing skyward. Secondary explosions rocked the mountainside munitions. Stores, grenades, RPGs cooking off in the inferno. The SEALs pressed forward into the cover she created, shifting from defense to offense. For hours they had been trapped. Now they were hunters again. Claire's fire tore holes in the enemy line, and through those holes the SEALs advanced, silent and ruthless. Radio chatter crackled as Daniels coordinated with her. Hog 2, advancing under your fire. Keep their heads down. Copy. She answered, looping around. I've got you covered. Each pass was a promise kept. She was their shield in the sky, their hammer against the enemy. And the way she flew, it wasn't reckless. Not anymore. It was artistry, honed by years of flying edges. The men on the ground felt it. They began to trust her completely. Hesitation remained. Every time she said she'd be back, they believed it, because she already had been. Even the wounded lifted their heads, eyes tracking the warthog as it howled overhead. Damn, Collins muttered, awe thick in his voice. That's not flying. That's something else. Daniels didn't reply. He didn't need to. They all knew they were watching history. For decades, soldiers had prayed for close air support, for aircraft to arrive before it was too late. They had seen jets flash overhead, too high, too fast. Their firepower precise but distant. They had seen drones circle, patient but slow, too late for moments like this. But today, they had seen something different. A pilot who refused altitude, who refused hesitation. A pilot who bent doctrine until it cracked. With each pass, Major Claire Donovan was rewriting the book. And the SEALs, hardened men who trusted little and doubted much, had decided one thing. She wasn't reckless. She was relentless. And she was theirs. The valley had changed. What began as a kill box for the SEALs had become a graveyard for the insurgents. Smoke coiled upward from shattered bunkers, the acrid stench of burning munitions mixing with dust and cordite. The ground team advanced. Methodically, rifles steady, using every second Claire bought them. But battles are rarely one-sided for long. The insurgents, though battered, were not broken. They regrouped in gullies and caves, dragging weapons into new positions. Their leaders barked orders, fury drowning fear. They had never seen a pilot fly like this, but they were determined to adapt. Daniels noticed it first. Through his scope he saw fighters dragging a heavy machine gun into place, angling it toward the sky. A second group prepped RPGs, positioning themselves along a narrow ridge to ambush the returning warthog. They're setting up for her, Daniels warned over cones. The SEALs' stomachs nodded. The enemy was no longer firing blindly. They were thinking, adjusting. And every adjustment meant new danger for Claire. Above, Claire banked wide, studying the valley below. Her HUD tracked smoke and terrain, but her instincts picked up what screens didn't show. The enemy was shifting. Their fire patterns were no longer scattered panic. They were deliberate, organized. Her wingman's voice crackled. 2. They're setting up traps. You want me to roll in? Negative, she replied firmly. Stay high, eyes out. I'll handle the valley. She didn't say it out loud, but she knew the truth. 1. Aircraft low was already a miracle. 2 would be suicide. Claire dipped into another dive. The insurgents unleashed everything. Tracers carved arcs across the sky, thicker than before, converging like a net. RPGs streaked upward, hissing white smoke trails. A heavy gun rattled from the ridge, sending streams of lead toward her nose. The SEALs gasped as the warthog cut through the storm. Claire felt rounds clatter against her armor, vibrations thudding. Through the frame, Warning lights blinked, flashing angry red. She ignored them. Her eyes locked on the heavy gun emplacement, her thumb steady on the trigger. The A-10 roared, drowning everything. The heavy gun vanished in a geyser of fire and dirt. The men manning it were torn apart in seconds, their threat erased. Claire pulled hard on the stick, banking to avoid the RPG streaking past her right wing. It detonated behind her, the shockwave rocking the warthog but failing to break her hold. Below, the SEALs exhaled as one. She had danced through fire and come out alive, but the insurgents weren't finished. They shifted again, trying to guess her angles, trying to predict where she would come from next. It was no longer a static firefight, it was chess. And Claire was moving faster than they could think. Her second pass came low and fast, too fast for the enemy to track. She tilted the warthog sideways, almost knife-edging through the valley. The SEALs stared in disbelief as the massive aircraft seemed to defy its own bulk, rolling just enough to unleash cannon fire along the ridge without clipping the cliffside. The shells tore trenches into the earth, scattering fighters like leaves in a storm. Unreal, Alvarez muttered, eyes wide. She's not flying a plane, she's flying a scalpel. The SEAL commander shook his head, unable to look away. He had seen pilots before, good ones, brave ones. But none had flown like this. None had bent physics into submission with sheer will. For Claire, every maneuver was instinct. Years of training, countless drills, hours spent studying the warthog's limits, all converged here. She wasn't reckless. She was precise, threading risk like a needle. The enemy thought in lines and ambushes. She thought in 3 dimensions, in curves, in split-second timing. On the ground, the SEALs pressed their advance. Every time insurgents tried to rally, Claire was there, unleashing another storm. They moved under her shield, rifles barking, boots pounding across broken rock. For the first time since dawn, they controlled momentum. But the duel wasn't over. A fresh barrage of RPGs arced skyward, fired in coordination from multiple ridges. The insurgents had learned, not one rocket, but many, saturating her path. Claire saw them streaking up, smoke trails crossing like deadly vines. She had seconds to choose. Instinct screamed to pull out. Altitude was safety. Doctrine would demand it. But the SEALs were beneath her, exposed. If she climbed, they would take the brunt. Her choice was already made. She pushed lower. The warthog howled into the valley floor, skimming so close dust exploded in her wake. The rocket sailed overhead, exploding harmlessly against cliffs. The insurgents had miscalculated, firing too high, too slow. Claire rolled, angled, and punished them for the mistake. The GAU-8 roared, erasing positions one by one. From below, Daniels could hardly believe what he was seeing. She had turned their trap inside out, using their timing against them. "God damn," he whispered. "She's fighting them like she can raid their minds." The SEALs surged forward, again, clearing what remained of resistance. With every step, their respect deepened. They had doubted her at first, whispered disbelief when her voice came over the radio. But now, after watching her duel an entire valley of fighters and win, there was no room for doubt. Claire Donovan wasn't just flying support. She was their lifeline. And every man on that ridge silently vowed that if they lived to tell the tale, they would never forget the day one pilot rewrote the meaning of close air support. The duel in the sky was far from over, but already the outcome felt inevitable. The enemy could adapt, could regroup, could fire every rocket they had. She would always be faster. Smoke hung over the valley like a funeral shroud. The ground shook intermittently, not from enemy fire anymore, but from the relentless punishment the A-10 had dealt out. Every pass, every strike, every thunderous burst of the GAU-8 had chewed through insurgent defenses, breaking their will piece by piece. The SEALs pushed deeper, moving from ridge to ridge, hunting stragglers and neutralizing survivors. Their pace had changed. They were no longer a hunted unit fighting for survival. They were predators. And above them, circling low and steady, was their guardian angel. But even angels had limits. Inside the cockpit, Claire Donovan knew the numbers too well. Her fuel gauge had dipped below critical thresholds, and her ammunition count was a cruel reminder that the GAU-8 was not bottomless. The weapon that had saved them so many times today was nearly spent. Her heart thudded in her chest as she calculated, weighed, and recalculated in silence. She could leave. Doctrine demanded it. Regulations were clear. Once fuel and ammunition reached this state, the aircraft must disengage, return to base, and ensure survival of the pilot and platform. But when she glanced at the ridges below, she saw the SEALs moving tiny figures against the vast landscape, outnumbered, still vulnerable. If she left now, she knew what would happen. The insurgents, battered but alive, would regroup. They would chase the SEALs through the valley, picking them off one by one. Her decision wasn't about doctrine. It was about lives. Daniels called. Over the radio. Hog 2, Citrip? Her voice came calm even, though her knuckles tightened on the stick. Low fuel. Winchester on cannon in 5. There was a pause on the line. The SEALs exchanged grim looks. Winchester. Empty. Daniels finally answered. Copy. You've done enough, Major. Punch out. Head home. We'll finish it. Claire almost smiled. She knew he meant it. It wasn't bravado. It was respect. The kind of respect operators rarely gave outsiders. But respect wasn't enough. Negative, Viper. I'm not leaving you blind. I'll stay on station. Daniels swore under his breath. He wanted to argue, but part of him was relieved. They weren't ready to lose her cover. They weren't ready to face the valley alone. Again, above, Claire scanned the terrain. The insurgents had shifted into small cells, firing sporadically to test the SEALs' movement. They weren't broken yet. And now, with her cannon nearly dry, she had to find new ways to keep pressure. On them, she armed her rockets. There weren't many, but they could buy time. Diving again, she unleashed a salvo on a ridge, collapsing stone over enemy positions. The blast rolled across the valley, scattering fighters. Dust billowed, and for a moment the SEALs advanced, unopposed. But rockets too had limits. When they were gone, her Warthog would be little more than an armored shell with a pilot's willpower. Her wingman's voice crackled. 2, you're at bingo fuel. I'll take over coverage. She shook her head, though no one could see. Negative, stay high. They'll chew you apart if you drop in. I'm already committed. Silence followed. Everyone listening knew what that meant. Claire wasn't planning to make it home with comfort fuel margins. She was burning her last reserves for the men below. The SEALs pushed again, clearing caves, marking new threats for her. Claire answered each call with surgical strikes, short bursts from what remained of her cannon. Precise rocket hits, or even just low passes that rattled the enemy's nerves. The sound of her engines had become a weapon in itself. Fighters dove for cover the instant they heard it. Still, the enemy fought back. A hidden RPG team fired as she roared overhead, the rocket exploding against her tail section. The cockpit shuddered violently, alarm screaming. Her breath hitched, but training steadied her hands. She leveled out, ran diagnostics in seconds. Damage, but not fatal. The Warthog lived up to its name, ugly, battered, but unstoppable. Daniel's voice cut through the static. Hog 2, status? Still flying, she answered simply. Jesus, Alvarez muttered on the ground. She's flying that thing into the dirt for us. And she was. Every decision, every risky maneuver, every ounce of fuel drained from her tanks, it was all for them. At last, her cannon sputtered. On a final burst. No more rounds, rockets gone. Missiles expended. She was Winchester across the board, but she stayed. Low passes became her new weapon. She roared over ridges at treetop level, so close the downwash kicked dust into enemy eyes. The insurgents flinched, ducking instinctively. Even without firepower, her presence suppressed them, buying the SEAL seconds they desperately needed. Claire felt sweat bead under her helmet. Her body screamed for rest, her mind replaying fuel numbers over and over. She had maybe minutes left before her tanks ran dry. She thought about ejecting, drifting into hostile mountains, waiting for rescue that might never come. She thought about her squadron back at base, waiting for a radio call that she was inbound. But mostly, she thought about the men below. The SEALs had put their trust in her. They had accepted her when no one else thought this mission possible. She wasn't going to repay that with abandonment. Daniel's voice came again, low but steady. Hog 2. You've done enough. If you don't get back now, you won't make it. She didn't answer. Instead, she rolled into another pass, engines howling like war drums across the valley. The SEALs looked up, silent, as she streaked overhead. They knew what she was giving them. They knew this wasn't doctrine. It wasn't procedure. It was sacrifice. On the ground, Daniel swallowed hard. Viper to all call signs. Move fast. She's bleeding out fuel. Let's finish this before she falls out of the sky. The team surged forward with renewed fury, driven by the knowledge that someone above was burning her last reserves for them. Every bullet they fired, every step they took, carried the weight of her devotion. Claire circled again, eyes heavy, hands steady. She had given everything she had: cannon, rockets, fuel. Only her will remained. And in war, sometimes will was. The deadliest weapon of all. The valley was a battlefield scarred into silence. Smoke drifted in gray columns, the smell of burning rock and cordite heavy in the air. Most insurgents had been crushed by the relentless storm Claire unleashed. Yet war is cruel, and war rarely ends cleanly. Daniels and his team had advanced deep into the ridges. Their objective, a high-value target directing enemy fighters, was close. But with every step, resistance hardened. Desperate men with nothing left to lose dug in, their fire more frenzied than ever. And above, the angel they depended on was fading. Claire's warthog shuddered on every turn, a wounded beast refusing to fall. Warning alarms flashed across her console like red stars. Her fuel gauge mocked her. Not minutes left, but seconds. She could almost feel the engines gulping fumes. She considered breaking off, climbing out, banking toward the long, lonely stretch back to base. Survival whispered its plea, but the radio cut in. Viper to Hog 2, Daniel said, his voice tight. We've got heavy contact on the North Ridge, RPG nests. If they light us up here, we're done. Claire looked out her canopy. She saw them, tiny figures in shadow, crouched along a jagged cliff, weapons angled toward the SEALs below. Too many, too fast. Without cover, the team would be torn apart. Her hands tightened on the stick. Her cannon was dry. Rockets gone. Missiles expended. Fuel bleeding. There was nothing left to give. Except one final pass. Claire's jaw set. Copy, Viper. Mark your position. I'll take care of the ridge. Her wingman's voice broke in, urgent. 2, you're on fumes. Break off. If you dive again, you won't climb out. She didn't answer. Some decisions didn't need discussion. Claire angled the warthog into a wide arc, lining up the ridge. Her eyes narrowed. This wasn't about weapons anymore. It was about physics, psychology, and will. She could still use the warthog's bulk, its engines, its roar. Sometimes the sound of death was as powerful as death itself. Below, Daniel's team fired furiously, pinned under the ridge. They could hear the rattle of RPGs being prepared. Every second stretched too long. Then they heard the thunder of turbines. Claire dropped into the valley, engines screaming. The A-10 skimmed the floor so low dust exploded in her wake. She pulled up just enough to clear the ridge, her massive frame blotting out the sun. The insurgents froze. For an instant, their courage shattered. They had faced bullets, rockets, fire, but this was something else. A machine of war, empty yet unbroken, bearing down on them with unstoppable fury. Claire tilted her wings, driving. The warthog within meters of their heads. The shockwaves slammed into them like a hurricane. Men were thrown off balance, weapons clattering to stone. RPGs slipped from hands, tumbling uselessly. The SEALs seized their chance. Daniels roared, "Push! Push now!" They surged forward, guns barking, precision and violence unleashed. Grenades arced into the ridge, detonating in thunder. Fighters scattered, screaming, but there was no escape. The SEALs cut them down with cold efficiency. Above, Claire pulled hard, engines wheezing. The warthog strained, climbing just enough to circle again. Her fuel light blinked its final warning. She had nothing left but fumes and grit. Daniel's voice cracked in her headset. "Hog 2. I don't know how you did it, but that ridge is clear. We're moving on target." For the first time, Claire allowed herself a breath. She wasn't safe, but she had given them the opening they needed. Her eyes flicked to the horizon. The return path stretched endless and uncertain. At her current fuel state, reaching base was impossible. She would either have to find a clearing to crash land or eject into hostile mountains. Both meant risk, but she wasn't done yet. The SEALs pressed deeper, reaching the compound where their target was. Hold up. Gunfire erupted again, close, sharp, desperate. Claire circled above, powerless to fire, yet unwilling to leave. She dipped lower, engines growling, each pass rattling the fighters inside. It was psychological warfare now. Every roar overhead unnerved the enemy. Every shadow across the compound walls sowed doubt. To them, the warthog wasn't empty. It was invincible. They fired wildly at the sky, wasting ammunition on a ghost. Inside the compound, Daniel's team breached with precision. Explosions tore through doors. Flashbangs disoriented defenders. Rifles spat disciplined fury. Minutes later, the objective was secured. Daniel's voice came over comms, strained but triumphant. Package secure. Mission complete. Claire exhaled, relief flooding through exhaustion. She had held the line long enough. She had given them the chance. But her reprieve was brief. Her engines coughed, sputtered, warning klaxons wailing. Fuel was gone. Gravity had come to collect its debt. Her wingman's voice broke in. 2, you're dropping fast. Say intentions. Claire steadied her breath. She could eject, yes. Punch out, let the parachute carry her down into hostile territory. Pray the SEALs could extract her. But that would shift danger back onto them, force them to divide attention between the mission and her survival. And she had sworn she would not be their burden. Her eyes scanned the valley floor. Flat terrain was scarce, but she spotted a dry riverbed stretching long and straight. Not perfect, not safe, but possible. I'm going to push her down, she said calmly. Her wingman cursed. 2, that's suicide. Eject now. Negative, Claire replied. "This bird's brought me this far. She deserves better than a parachute goodbye." The seals, listening, felt their throats tighten. They had never met her in person. They didn't even know her face beyond the voice in their combs. Yet in this crucible, she had become theirs, one of them. Daniel's voice was rough. "Hog too. Whatever happens, we'll find you. That's a promise." Claire gave a faint smile, unseen beneath her helmet. "I'll hold you to it." She angled into the dry riverbed, lowering gear, hands steady, though her heart thundered. The Warthog groaned, battered, leaking fuel, engines coughing their last. The valley held its breath as she descended. One last pass. One last gamble. For her team. For her promise. For survival. The valley stretched before her like a jagged scar. Claire's hands gripped the stick, her body taut with focus. The Warthog groaned beneath her, engines sputtering on fumes, hydraulics sluggish from damage. Warning klaxons shrieked in her headset, each one a reminder that her time aloft had run out. But her mind was quiet. She had faced the impossible before flying lower than doctrine allowed, threading firestorms no one dared attempt. Now came the last test, putting the Warthog down in enemy country and living to tell the story. Her eyes locked on the dry riverbed. Narrow, uneven, littered with rocks. No control tower to guide her. No smooth runway awaiting. Just instinct, skill, and will. She throttled back, feeling the beast descend. The frame rattled violently, like a dying animal refusing surrender. Claire spoke aloud to calm herself. "Easy, girl. One more fight. Just one more." The seals, advancing with their captured target, looked skyward. Dust plumed as the A-10 swept low, lining up the riverbed. Daniels knew exactly what she was doing. His stomach tightened. "She's not ejecting," he muttered. "Jesus," Alvarez said. "She's going to ride it down." Claire lowered the landing gear. A groan reverberated through the cockpit as battered hydraulics resisted. 2 gears locked, the third only halfway. Lights blinked amber, mocking imperfection. No time to fix it. No second chance. The ground raced toward her. She flared the nose, hands steady, sweat dripping into her eyes. Impact. The Warthog slammed. The riverbed, metal screaming. One wheel collapsed instantly, the nose jerking down. Sparks showered as steel scraped rock, the aircraft grinding forward in a cloud of dust and smoke. Claire braced, muscles locking against the violent jolt. The world became chaos, skidding, tearing, the smell of burning rubber, the thunder of collapsing parts. The Warthog lurched sideways, plowing through stones before finally grinding to a shuddering halt. Silence followed, broken only by ticking metal cooling in the sun. Inside, Claire blinked through haze, alive, bruised, blood trickling at her. Temple, but alive. She touched the battered console with a trembling hand. "You did it," she whispered to the machine that had carried her farther than logic allowed. Then reality snapped back. She was down in hostile territory. And the enemy wasn't finished. Figures moved along the ridges, insurgents regrouping, drawn by the thunder of her crash. They raised weapons, pointing toward the plume of smoke where the A-10 lay crippled. Daniel saw it. He didn't hesitate. "All teams shift. Get to the crash site now." The SEALs surged, dragging their captive, rifles blazing at scattered fighters. They bounded from rock to rock, covering each other, every step driven by urgency. Claire wasn't just a pilot anymore. She was theirs, and leaving her wasn't an option. In the cockpit, Claire forced the canopy open. It jammed halfway. She kicked it with both legs, metal groaning before finally popping free. She hauled herself out, every muscle aching. The hot sun beat down, the air thick with smoke. Gunfire echoed closer. She ducked low, pistol drawn a sidearm against Enfian. Army. For a moment, she thought grimly that maybe this was where it ended. But shadows moved ahead of her, swift, precise, disciplined. The SEALs burst through the dust like avenging spirits, rifles cutting down insurgents closing in. Daniels reached her first, sliding beside the wreck. "Major Donovan?" he barked. Claire, still catching her breath, gave a sharp nod. "On your feet. You're coming with us." She managed a wry smile, despite the chaos. "About damn time." We met. Alvarez and 2 others formed a protective wall, cutting down approaching fighters. "We've got movement all over the ridges." "We need to move, sir." Daniels nodded, gripping Claire's arm, helping her steady. "Can you walk?" "Running might hurt," she admitted, "but walking's fine." "Good. Then you're—" "Running," Daniels said flatly. They moved fast, weaving through rock as gunfire rained from the cliffs. The insurgents were furious, denied victory in the sky. They meant to claim it on the ground. But the SEALs fought with renewed ferocity, driven by something deeper than orders. Claire had risked everything for them. Now they would return the favor. The extraction zone was still miles off. Helicopters thumped faintly in the distance, inbound but too far. Survival meant holding out until they arrived. The SEALs dug into a defensive pocket, using boulders for cover. Claire crouched among them, pistol steady, her breaths ragged. For the first time, she wasn't the one above providing cover. She was the one shielded by men who had doubted her, men who now looked at her as something more than a pilot. Daniels crouched beside her, firing short bursts. "You saved us, Major. You know that?" Claire didn't answer immediately. She just reloaded, eyes sharp, scanning the ridges. Finally, she said quietly, "That's what I came for." The firefight raged, bullets sparking rock, RPGs shaking the ground, but the SEALs held. Every time insurgents tried to mass, they were cut down. Every time the perimeter wavered, someone filled the gap. And always, the sound of approaching rotors grew louder. Finally, through the smoke, Black Hawks appeared, dark angels descending. Their miniguns chewed ridges into silence, the thud of rockets silencing resistance. Ropes unfurled and reinforcements fast roped down, pushing back what remained. Daniel signaled, "Move, birds are here." The SEALs hustled Claire and their captive toward the waiting helicopter. She stumbled once, but Alvarez caught her, half carrying her up the ramp. Inside, the crew hauled her aboard. Daniels followed last, slamming the door shut as the Black Hawk lifted. Below, the valley burned. The wreck of her warhog smoldered. In the riverbed, a monument to defiance. The insurgents scattered, broken. Claire sat back against the bulkhead, helmet in her lap, chest heaving. For the first time, exhaustion claimed her fully. Daniels leaned across, gripping her shoulder. "You did the impossible," he said simply. She gave a faint, weary smile. "The SEALs said it was impossible." He laughed, shaking his head. "And you proved us all wrong." The Black Hawk carried them into the horizon, the valley fading beneath. A mission completed. A legend born. In the weeks to follow, stories spread across bases and barracks. Of the A-10 major who flew lower than anyone dared, who shielded a SEAL team through fire and fury, who refused to leave until the job was done. Some called it reckless. Some called it insane. But for those who were there, one word was enough. Unforgettable. Claire Donovan returned home quietly, without parades or cameras. But among the warriors who lived because of her, her name became more than a call sign. It became a promise that when everything seemed lost, sometimes someone would still dare the impossible. And in every briefing, every hangar, every whispered, Story passed to new recruits. One truth remained. They said it was impossible. Until she flew.